Hello, my name is Claire Muselman, and I'm one of the co-founders of The Transitions. And with me today, I have Mark Pew, also one of the co-founders of The Transitions. And today we are going to talk about communication models in workers' compensation. So Mark, I'm going to kick this off with a very easy question that I'm sure has a lot of complexity in its answers. Why do people find the workers' compensation industry so confusing? Or why is it felt that it is very hard to understand or hard to navigate when there's so many of us who are out here trying to make the information consumable and digestible?
Because it is.
Yeah,
That's the really simple answer. Workers' comp is not a federal system, although there is, one for the federal employees, but, every state is different. And certainly I think what I have seen since I've been involved in work comp since 1990 is a lot of those multi-state kind of overviews. It used to be that an adjuster could focus on a jurisdiction and become very, very hyper-focused and understanding all the nuances. And there's a crap load of nuances when it comes to, statutes and rules and all that kind of stuff. But then when you get claims adjusters who are dealing with multiple states and have to bounce around on a daily basis, bounce around between 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 different jurisdictions as they're handling different claims. It takes a full almost mind shift in remembering all the rules that haven't necessarily been inculcated in the claim system. And then from an injured worker standpoint, they still probably call it workman's compensation if they even know what it's called. They have no idea about the complexity. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, got injured. Maybe they've got a doctoral degree like you do. Maybe they have a GED.
Yeah.
Lots of different levels of understanding. They may or may not have taken good care of their body before the injury occurred from a healthcare literacy standpoint, so they're not even sure about preventative care and that kind of stuff. And then the other big stakeholder, obviously, is the providers. And work comp typically is a very small portion, other than OCMED doctors. When you talk to a general practitioner or orthopod, now pulmonologist, when you're talking about COVID, work comp is such a small, tiny fraction, and the bureaucracy and the documentation and the hoops that you got to jump through for work comp. Oftentimes, if they're jumping into work comp, they've got to hire a full-time clerk just to handle the paperwork that they're not used to doing from a private pay or Medicare or Medicaid. So when they come in and they see 1 out of 10 patients in work comp, again, their whole mind has to shift from how I usually do it for 90% of my patients to now I've got, to quote Monty Python, I'm now something for completely different when it comes to that. So, I think the complexity comes from the complexity, and based on how comp has been built, it's built on complexity, unfortunately.
We need to do something to change that. I think that the navigation is really challenging. And I think that one of the other factors when we talk about just the nature of human beings is how we effectively listen or actively listen. And so when we're working with injured human beings, there's a lot of fear that goes into, okay, where's my next paycheck going to come from? Is the physician even listening to me? Like, I'm having pain. Do you hear me? And trying to get that acknowledgement of I see you, I hear you, and that you matter in this system from an employer standpoint, because as has been shared a lot more recently, there's a lot of animosity that occurs when an injured worker goes to their employer and says, hey, I've been injured. And then there's suddenly like a break in communication. And then the injured worker is not talked to again by their direct leader or somebody within the organization. And then they are automatically, I don't want to say it in this platform, but I guess shipped off to HR to deal with when maybe they've never worked with HR before in their life, or it's not somebody that they ever talked to. And then there's all those things where it almost becomes like this emotional hijacking effect, where if you are not filling those gaps with factual information, like actually having the injured worker's direct supervisor reach out and just say, hey, I care, I just want to make sure you're okay, then the injured worker is going to start telling it. The injured worker will start telling themselves like, okay, they're mad at me, or they don't want me back, or my coworkers are mad at me, or I'm not hearing from anyone. So does anyone even care? And I think you start going down that rabbit hole, and then you add in the other complexities of all these other people that get involved. And so I think that there's a lot of avenues that we can use to help, but I also agree that there's just so statute driven and it's never written for us to actually read or consume. It's like you have to get a legal degree to be able to read and understand. And each state has such different nuances that you're correct. And I don't really know how we got there. I mean, the intent's there, but when we look at it from a communication standpoint of how do we make this work for all people, we've definitely missed the boat on how to drive effective communication in this space.
Yeah, it's a lack of information. You start to make your own reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that was brought forward to me several years ago. I started working out really heavily because I needed to lose some weight. And my parents, I remember this interaction at my house, and they said, "You've been losing a lot of weight. Are you dying?" And I said, "No, I just been treating my body a whole lot better." And they started crying. It's like, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to die." It's like, no. So, in the absence of information, they kind of made up their own reality, right? And
Yeah.
that we're getting better. We've heard the term bedside manner forever from a practitioner, from a clinician standpoint, and definitely that's important to peer over your digital tablet and actually, look at eye to eye, and the physical touch. Not inappropriate, but just the sense of caring is important. But I think bedside manner is important for claims adjusters as well. The whole concept of the tone that they use on the phone, you can hear an eye roll. I know that doesn't make sense, but if you've been in a conversation where you're not physically, you can hear the eye roll, right? Just based on the tone that they use, based on the words that they're using, the function that you're kind of distracting, they're dismissive of you. That whole bedside manner. One of my very first business mentors really told me, it really helped me a lot. And he said, smile into the phone. I was like, this ain't the Jetsons. I don't need to smile into the phone. And he said, but if you're smiling into the phone, the physical action of smiling actually changes your tone, changes your attitudes, changes the words that you use. The fact that you are happy, the fact that you are engaged with them makes a difference. And even though they can't see your face, they can hear that you have a smile as opposed to an eye roll. And so I think, that active listening that you mentioned, not asking yes or no answers, but asking questions in order to understand where they're coming from, to allow them room to talk, to allow them room to share where they're coming from, will alleviate that gap in understanding. And they'll go, I got no idea what you talk about when you say the ACRP 275 dash. That, I got no idea what you're talking about. The claims adjuster is just popping off all these acronyms and forms and all this stuff. And they go, you lost me within the first 30 seconds. If you don't listen to what they're saying, you are talking to them, you're talking at them, and you're going completely over their head. And there's probably important stuff that you're sharing with them that they're not getting because they tuned you out because they didn't know what AC2.4 dash blah 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 is in the form. And so I think when we're talking on the payer side, adjusters, nurse case managers, medical directors, all the different people that engage with injured workers directly, supervisors at the employees, that used to be best buddies and now they don't call them. I heard somebody make mention of the best thing a claims adjuster can do is to stay engaged with the employee. And that means the supervisor, if they're going to a surgery, and I know you've done this before, send them a card, send them a message saying, I'm thinking about you, send them flowers afterwards, just to let them know they're still a part of the team. It doesn't cost you very much whatsoever, but the downstream effect, the positive effect of having that level of communication with them can dramatically change the trajectory of the claim.
Absolutely. I love the idea of sending cards. I do. I'm happy my team does it. We don't really talk about that as much anymore, but I know they all do it. And I love seeing, like in the claim files, we document it, like send the injured worker a card for their birthday, their anniversary was coming up, they're having surgery, because we always look at it from the scope of our control. Like, what can we do from the claim side to help drive outcomes and to make people feel seen, heard, and acknowledged is just so easy to do. And it takes such little effort to make such a big impact. So I like that you talk about the downstream effect of that, because it is so impactful. And again, like, I can't guarantee that Joe's supervisor is going to call him the day after surgery. But even when I was having my own hip surgery, I remember our president at the time sent me a text that morning and was like, "Good luck today. Let me know how it goes." And that's my boss's boss at that point. And that was really nice. And then
Mm-hmm.
followed up the next day, and I think the next day. And then I was back in the office the following week. But it was really nice to just be like, "Hey, thinking of you." You don't have to say anything, because I know we get that. There's a lot of animosity that goes into, workers' compensation. But again, it costs you nothing to be a good human. And it takes about 2 seconds to send a text these days. It just says, "Hey, thinking of you." You don't have to have a long, drawn out conversation. And you know what? You can use an emoji. I mean, there's just so many different ways
Yep.
that are so easy to just make people feel that they matter.
Well, and work comp has been filled with Einsteins pretty much all the decades I've been working on. Einstein, not the guy who, discovered, the different things that he did, but the Einstein that keeps doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So we get downstream, and this claim went south, and they got represented, and that attorney really kind of stirred the pot a lot, and then everything is antagonistic. Everything has to be documented in triplicate, and you have to CYA all the way through the entire claim, because you're never quite sure how this could go in different directions. And Einsteins go, "We're going to continue to do exactly the same stuff that we did from a claims adjudication standpoint, communication model, all the different things." And you got to take a step back and go, what was the root cause of that? Maybe we ticked off the injured worker very early on in the process by pretending that they didn't exist, or dismissing their concerns, or saying that you don't get the big picture without giving them the big picture and explaining stuff. And they go, "You know what? They're trying to take advantage of me, and I don't trust them anymore. They don't
Mhm.
me anymore. They make their own reality. They get represented, and then it all goes downhill from there." So, we need the anti-Einstein, right? We need the people like you that are going, status quo is done. We got
Yeah.
to do it differently. If we want different results, we got to do it differently.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of value into understanding, like, creating consumable information. And I know Bob Wilson published this many years ago of an insurance company that had made a letter to their injured worker where it's literally talking to them like they're a person instead of citing statute. I think it was written for like an 8th grade level. I think is
Mm-hmm.
about what it was. And it's so easy to understand, and why we don't do more of that. I know we've revised a lot of our language. We have a woman in our team that's actually from Medicaid compliance. And so she had to really help make consumable information for the Medicaid program. And we purposely hired her because she was so good at making information easily consumable for no matter what age range and what education level, et cetera, that we were like, help us with how we verbiage things out so that people do understand. And I think when we are communicating information, I'm a big fan of using multiple mediums. So even if you and I have a verbal conversation, I like to follow up with an email or a letter back in the day before email was like a normal thing, because I think it's important that people have, one, a repository for tracking information, and two, you might not hear everything that I say, so let me follow up in another way. And I want to be easily accessible in case you need anything. So maybe you're not going to be able to call because you're sitting at your child's baseball game or something, but you think of something like, "Hey, just curious about pharmacy," or something like that. Easy to send off a quick email and things like that, where we make it so that it's easier to get access to the answers that you need when you have a fear of what else is to come. If you don't know what's going to happen, like say you've never been in an MRI before, and so the doctor orders an MRI, and maybe you're claustrophobic and you're terrified because you have no idea what's going to happen to you. I think that we need to be able to have those type of empathic conversations with injured workers, so you can help them understand, like, okay, so an MRI, they're going to be in a very enclosed space. If this is an issue for you, let's make sure that you can talk to a nurse case manager, or let's talk to a doctor, so that if you need, I don't know, any type of sedation, or I'm not sure exactly what they do for people that get high anxiety with that, but let's find a way to make it work so that we can get you back into that, almost that indemnified process of getting you back into your health, so that you can be back into your life and you can get back to work and move on.
Yeah, and I think from an injured worker standpoint, it's just as important, right? I did a CE presentation probably 5 or 6 years ago, and one of the things I talked about was, and I raised a question to the audience, go, how many of y'all, when you go to a doctor, take a pad of paper and a pen and take notes during the interaction? How many of y'all know all the words that your doctor or your PA or the nurse practitioner or the nurse or whomever, how many of y'all know all the words, the terminology? How many of y'all review what was done from a compliance standpoint? And very few people raise their hand. We go into the doctor and they tell us, and it's rapid fire, and we kind of go, yeah, I kind of get it, So, I think it's incumbent. We've been focusing on the claims adjuster on the payer side, but on the injured worker side, they're responsible for communication as well. They need to understand. They need to take notes. They need to raise questions when they don't fully understand. They need to raise their hand and go, hey, stop. Explain what you just said. Define what you're just talking about. Help me understand that. They need to be engaged. They can't be passive participants in this. They're not in the passenger seat. They're not in the rear view seat. They're in the passenger. They're in the driver's seat, or they should be in the driver's seat. So they should feel empowered. And if they don't feel empowered, they should be empowered. They should empower themselves to say, stop, help me understand. I don't fully gather this. Let's slow the roll a little bit. Explain again what the ABC 72-high 5, explain what all that stuff means before that. So I think we need to have injured workers that are empowered, feel empowered, and if they don't feel empowered, to be empowered, to be engaged, to be in the driver's seat of that, take notes, use Google. There are unanswered questions. I have this running joke, when somebody at the dinner table go, I wonder what, it's like, we got a pocket rocket, let's go ahead and dial up Google and figure out what we're going to do about this. Right. I mean, there are unanswered questions.
I also think that one of the really good examples, and I love using this because this is such an easy fix. So when injured workers get a medical bill that is sent to their house, so we train to make sure that on the front end that we communicate, hey, in case you get a medical bill, you got to let us know. It does not mean that we are not paying it. It means that there's a possibility that when they put in the work comp insurance, that they clicked button 1 versus button 2, or they put personal health versus work comp, or vice versa. But there's always, it's not a necessity that we are denying anything, but we don't know what we don't know. So I don't know if you get a bill, Mark, for your shoulder surgery that I told you that we were going to cover under workers' comp if you don't tell me. And what happens is our workers get frustrated and they think that we've denied the bill, and that's why they're getting it sent to their house. And then, they don't pay it because, no, this is work comp, or they ignore it, and then they get a bill from collections. And I can tell you, even being on the insurance side, when we're trying to fix when they've gone to collections, they are the least favorable people to work with on those types of
Yeah.
We joke about it sometimes where it's like, oh, who wants to make the phone call? But we aren't doing that, but I don't know what I don't know. So if that gets sent to your house, you got to tell me, because by the time we go down that road, well, how many bills did you get? Well, I just assumed that you guys would figure it out. Well, you gotta talk to me. Like, there's got to be communication that goes both ways. And I think that's really imperative. One of the other things that I think is really useful and a tool for adjusters and also for employers is to have really good quality nurse case managers that are your boots on the ground to help make information consumable if the injured worker feels apprehensive, because they can do a lot of good to help, one, break down the medical treatment, to help alleviate that unknown for the procedures that might be ahead, how you're going to feel afterwards. I mean, not everyone's broken or had as many surgeries as some of us have. And so, very empathic and say, hey, I know what this feels like. This is what my experience was. A lot of times they aren't going to have that. And so what can you do to help bridge that gap in understanding and taking the time to really set forth, okay, hey, your doctor's appointment's coming up on Thursday. You're probably going to get released to return to work with X kind of restrictions, right? So let's say they're 10-pound restrictions if we're looking at a shoulder. All right, so let's think about a gallon of milk, and like really breaking it down so people can visualize and think about what it is that they can and can't do. But then it's also almost equally as important to give people a vision of where they want to be. We had a 7-year-old injured worker, and she was adamant that she was going to be golfing in June at this point. And I can't remember exactly when the claim was, but it was June was when she wanted to be golfing with her grandkids. And so she posted a photo on her fridge, and she posted one in her bedroom, and she had pictures of where she wanted to be and we talked to her about it, where she'd be like, okay, this is where I'm at, but this is where I'm going to be. And when you can give people a good vision of something that's personally important to them, guess what? She had a shoulder injury. Well, what are you going to need to use in golf? So when we talk about getting people back into their life and that helps get them back into their work elements, it's a lot easier if you can get somebody to think about those emotional, like where they can evoke the emotion of she wanted to be with her grandchildren. She wanted to be golfing on a golf course with her grandchildren. So we get all that emotion and the work fell right into place because that's exactly what she needed to do for work from like a movement standpoint and a lifting standpoint, and it all falls into place. And I think we lose touch with humanity sometimes on that, where we just focus on, I need Mark to be able to lift 50 pounds. Okay, well, what else encompasses Mark? How else does Mark like to work? Does Mark like to work out with his kids? Does he play football? Does he play softball? Does he play volleyball? Like, what does Mark do outside of his like 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever it is? Like, what are the other 16 hours of the day look like for Mark? And trying to figure out different ways that you can use vision to help and you can communicate that vision so the mind can get where it needs to be and then the body can follow. And that's something that I think that a lot of adjusters could use and injured workers can use to help get themselves on that road to recovery. And that's not an avenue we tend to explore as often as I think could be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And so when you kind of summarize, when you're talking about reimagining communication model, you're talking about honesty, you're talking about visualization, you're talking about it being bi-directional, you're talking about it being empathetic, you're talking about not necessarily dumbing it down, but making sure that it is consumable.
Yeah.
Your point. And it's true for every single stakeholder. So, if you're reimagining communication model, it really is what the best practices are in communication just in general, right? I mean, we're not talking about earth-shattering, Claire and Mark just figured out how to, solve communication on planet Earth. It's how people accurately and appropriately and effectively communicate in every other single scenario. So it's just taking our regular life and putting it into the work context.
Yeah, it's really that simple.
So we started very complex and ended very simple. Just treat other people like you would like to be treated.
The golden rule.
Yep. Still good.
Absolutely. So you can hear more on this topic on Tuesday, March 16th, where we will be having a panel discussion on reimagining the communication model in workers' compensation. Hope to see you there.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Mark.